Welcome to Cognitive Dose. We are here, as always, curing blind spots and shattering cognitive bias. Welcome to the debate. Today, we are looking at a pretty seductive premise that has dominated corporate boardrooms, creative studios, and even, athletic training camps for years.
Oh, absolutely. It is everywhere.
Right. It's this idea that if you simply put in 10,000 hours of grueling, dedicated practice, you are absolutely guaranteed to achieve mastery. We are dissecting Robert Greene's wildly popular and, I'd say, highly influential book, Mastery.
Yeah, it's a text you really cannot escape. I mean, you can't navigate the modern performance landscape, whether you're in Silicon Valley or on Wall Street, without bumping into somebody quoting its frameworks. It has reached this near mythical status.
Exactly. But today we are asking a fundamental question about the architecture of this book. Does Greene's highly sequential framework offer a democratized, universally applicable blueprint for human achievement? Or, is it an intellectualized illusion built on fragile scientific, systemic, and psychological premises?
Which is exactly what we need to figure out.
Right. So I will be laying out the robust architecture and the profound appeal of Greene's developmental trajectory. Meanwhile, my colleague will methodically deconstruct the empirical validity and structural blind spots of this paradigm.
Looking forward to it.
Let's start with the framework itself. Because to understand why mastery is so universally revered, you have to understand the meticulous, deterministic trajectory that Greene constructs. He argues that mastery isn't random. It's a very specific sequence.
Okay, a sequence starting where?
It begins with discovering an innate life's task. Greene suggests we all have a primal inclination, an inner calling, much like Charles Darwin feeling compelled to collect biological specimens, or, Leonardo da Vinci obsessively observing the geometry of nature.
A sort of hidden biological destiny that we just have to unlock.
Precisely. Once you identify that task, you must submit to what he calls an ideal apprenticeship. This is a grueling 5 to 11-year period where you absorb tacit knowledge. The key here is valuing deep learning over immediate financial gain or status.
Which is a massive time commitment, obviously.
Oh, huge. But after that decade of relentless focus, you must absorb a mentor's power, outgrow them, and then develop what Greene terms social intelligence to navigate human friction. And finally, you awaken the dimensional mind.
Dimensional mind, which is a very grand term. We should probably define what he actually means by that.
Fair point. The dimensional mind in Greene's framework is the ultimate cognitive state. It's where you fuse the rapid, almost unconscious pattern recognition of human intuition with the rigorous, slow logic of the rational brain.
Right.
Think of a chess grandmaster who can instantly, feel the right move on the board, but can also mathematically calculate 12 steps ahead to prove it. The profound beauty of this entire thesis is its biological egalitarianism.
Okay, egalitarian in what sense?
Well, Greene argues that supreme skill is democratized. It dispenses with the myth of the divine spark or the genetic lottery. If you put in the hours and follow the sequence, you achieve the result. The locus of control is entirely in your hands.
I completely acknowledge the romantic appeal of that narrative. I mean, it's an incredibly seductive piece of historical maneuvering because, exactly as you said, it hands the keys to the kingdom over to the individual.
Right.
But when subjected to modern cognitive psychology, sociology, and statistical probability, the text rapidly unravels. What we are actually looking at is a framework that relies on outdated cognitive science.
That's a strong claim.
It is, but it's true. It is plagued by structural logical fallacies, specifically an extreme overfitting of historical data. And perhaps most dangerously, it possesses a staggering blindness to the systemic and socioeconomic realities that actually govern human opportunity. When you strip away the elegant storytelling of Da Vinci and Darwin, the foundation is, frankly, empirical sand.
Well, let's test that foundation, starting with the bedrock of Greene's entire process, the 10,000-hour rule, and the concept of deliberate practice. I know it's fashionable to attack a neat, round number like 10,000, but let's look at the mechanism Greene is deploying here.
Sure, he uses this metric to fundamentally dispense with the paralyzing myth of inborn genius. By stating that intense focus and deliberate practice over a prolonged period determine absolute mastery, he is offering a radically empowering idea.
Empowering, yes.
Right, because it means the barrier to entry isn't your DNA, it's your discipline. He points to Darwin, who openly admitted he had no great quickness of apprehension, but who spent 8 years exclusively studying barnacles to establish his credentials. The practice itself is the great equalizer. That sounds elegant in theory, but the data suggests something completely different. Greene's premise rests almost entirely on Anders Ericsson's 10,000-hour rule, a concept that has been thoroughly debunked in contemporary cognitive science.
Thoroughly debunked? I mean, practice obviously matters.
It matters, yes, but the assertion that deliberate practice alone trumps genetics is scientifically illiterate. If we look at recent massive replication failures, notably the seminal research led by Dr. Brooke McNamara, the empirical reality is stark.
Okay, what did McNamara find?
Well, McNamara rigorously replicated the original 1993 study on elite violin players, and she definitively proved that deliberate practice accounts for less than 20% of the variance in elite performance.
Wait, less than 20%? But 20% is still a significant chunk of human variance. We aren't saying practice doesn't matter.
No, we aren't. But Greene is arguing that practice is the only thing that matters, that it is the great equalizer. McNamara looked at those elite violinists again and found something shocking. Practice only accounted for 20% of why they were great.
So what's the other 80% then?
Exactly. Why does the gap exist? Because after a certain point of baseline practice, what separates the good from the elite isn't time spent. It's how quickly your specific nervous system forms myelin around neural pathways. It's your biological architecture. Greene completely ignores the biology of learning.
Interesting.
What fills that massive 80% gap are the exact things Greene explicitly dismisses: genetic predispositions, innate cognitive architecture, and baseline personality traits. We are talking about intrinsic working memory capacity.
Working memory meaning what, practically?
Think of working memory as the brain's RAM. If you're learning complex coding, deliberate practice helps. But someone with high working memory can hold 10 possible variables in their head at once. Someone with average memory can only hold 3.
I see what you mean.
10,000 hours of practice will not upgrade your biological RAM. Greene trades rigorous behavioral science for cherry-picked historical anomalies.
I'm going to push back on that, because we really have to look at the psychological utility of the belief itself. Let's concede your point for a moment. Let's say that 10,000 hours isn't mathematically perfect. Let's say it requires a certain baseline working memory.
Which it does.
Sure. But isn't Greene's dogma still a necessary psychological framework? I mean, if a practitioner believes that genetics are a hard ceiling, they are almost guaranteed to give up at the first sign of profound difficulty. The illusion of complete control might be the psychological prerequisite for the endurance required to reach that dimensional mind phase. You have to believe your effort is the ultimate variable, or you simply won't survive the grind.
That is a fascinating defense. You're essentially arguing that a useful delusion is better than a demotivating truth. But the psychological cost of that delusion is catastrophic burnout.
Catastrophic burnout? How so?
When you create a false egalitarianism that ignores neurobiological reality, you place a crushing burden on the individual. If practice is the only variable, then failure to achieve absolute mastery is no longer a matter of biological limits or, environmental constraints. It becomes entirely a personal moral failing.
Because you didn't try hard enough?
Exactly. It means you just didn't focus hard enough, you didn't want it badly enough. It creates unrealistic expectations that actively damage mental health, rather than simply encouraging people to pursue their interests with a realistic understanding of their own cognitive baseline.
But if genetics are a hard ceiling, as you suggest, how do we explain the fact that almost all historical masters, regardless of their baseline IQ or biological RAM, spent 5 to 10 years in total obscurity doing grunt work?
Well, they did put in the time.
Right. Greene argues that this apprenticeship phase is actually what bridges the gap between raw genetics and elite mastery. Let's look at the mechanics of this phase. Greene instructs the reader to endure 5 to 11 years of low-paid or unpaid labor, which is a huge ask. It is, but the logic is incredibly sound.
You must prioritize deep skill acquisition and mentor assimilation over immediate financial gain. You trade short-term capital for long-term tacit knowledge.
Okay.
You mute your colors, observe the power dynamics, and learn the inner workings of the machinery without the pressure of producing immediate commercial value. It's an incubation period.
Let's unpack the hidden assumption there, because this is where the text suffers from profound class blindness. To casually instruct a reader to endure 5 to 11 years of unpaid or negligible wage labor is the ultimate manifestation of extreme class privilege.
You really think it's just privilege?
Absolutely. This instruction assumes a weird-centric world: Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. It assumes a world of limitless generational wealth, subsidized housing, or systemic safety nets.
Right, I get that.
For the vast majority of the global population, the immediate necessity of physical survival, crushing debt, or feeding dependents makes an 11-year low-yield apprenticeship a functional impossibility.
Look, I need to speak for the listener right now. There are listeners who have spent the last 3 years grinding at a low-paying job specifically because Greene told them to prioritize learning over earning. Hearing you call this class blindness might feel incredibly dismissive of their hard work.
I understand that.
Are you saying their sacrifice is useless? Greene specifically uses examples of historical figures who faced significant poverty and adversity to show that this isn't just for the aristocracy.
I am absolutely not saying their sacrifice is useless, and I respect the grit it takes to endure that. Really, I do. But what they are fighting against is exactly my point. Greene uses a few historical figures who overcame poverty, but that brings us to the most lethal logical flaw in the book: catastrophic survivorship bias.
Survivorship bias in what sense?
In plain English, Greene is walking through a graveyard, only looking at the one guy who crawled out alive and assuming everyone else just didn't try hard enough. He completely ignores the denominator problem.
The denominator problem being the thousands of invisible failures?
Precisely. The invisible graveyard of individuals who executed these exact same strategies. They identified their passion, labored for 10,000 hours, sought out mentorship, but they failed in obscurity due to systemic barriers, severe illness, structural bias, or pure random mathematical chance.
That is a dark way to look at it.
Furthermore, Greene assumes a frictionless, purely meritocratic environment where elite gatekeepers evaluate apprentices neutrally. In reality, mentorship relies heavily on homophily.
Homophily?
It's the sociological tendency for people in power to select and nurture protégés who look, speak, and act exactly like them. Marginalized individuals face implicit bias. They are required to outwardly perform dominant cultural norms just to gain access to the room. Greene ignores this immense friction and effectively blames individuals lacking capital for their failure to achieve mastery.
I see the weight of that argument, but let me challenge this with an analogy. When a physicist explains the law of gravity, they often start by assuming a frictionless vacuum.
Sure, stand or practice.
Right. They strip away air resistance to explain the core mechanical principle of how objects fall. Is it possible that Greene is simply writing a manual for the ideal conditions of success? He is mapping the optimal path, outlining the pure mechanics of skill acquisition.
Okay, I follow you.
If he were to write a sociological treatise detailing every single systemic barrier, it would dilute the behavioral architecture he is trying to build. He's acknowledging that the terrain might be unfair, but he's giving you the compass anyway.
I love the vacuum analogy, but here's the problem. When a physicist assumes a vacuum, the laws of gravity still fundamentally work when you add the air back in. With Greene's framework, the moment you add the air resistance of poverty, systemic bias, or trauma, the formula entirely collapses.
Entirely collapses? Isn't that an overstatement?
Not at all. You cannot strip away the environment when the environment physically shapes the human brain. We have to talk about the neurobiology of systemic stress. Populations subjected to multi-generational poverty or systemic marginalization experience scientifically documented alterations in their neurological baseline.
Okay, you're talking about chronic stress.
Yes, chronic stress keeps you in a sympathetic nervous system state, a constant fight or flight. This literally impairs the prefrontal cortex, which is the exact part of the brain you need for Greene's deep observation and dimensional mind. Greene demands cold emotional detachment and unwavering, relaxed focus.
Right.
By treating the brain as a perfectly resilient blank slate, he makes his philosophy totally inaccessible to anyone carrying systemic trauma. Assuming a frictionless vacuum in human development isn't just bad sociology, it's bad neurobiology.
Okay, but navigating that very air resistance or friction is exactly why Greene introduces the next major phase of his sequence, social intelligence. He actually acknowledges that the environment is hostile.
He does talk about it, yes.
He advises practitioners to drop their naive perspectives because the greatest obstacle to mastery isn't technical. It's the emotional drain from dealing with the resistance and manipulations of others. He outlines the 7 deadly realities, things like envy, conformism, and rigidity.
Right, the realities of human nature.
Exactly. He teaches you to emotionally detach so you can accurately observe people, navigate the political environment smoothly, and save your cognitive energy for your craft. It's a defensive mechanism to protect your focus.
That is the stated intention, yes. It sounds like a survival guide. But if you look closely at the actual mechanics of what he's suggesting, this framework fundamentally corrupts emotional intelligence.
Corrupts it? How?
It reduces human interaction to a Machiavellian zero-sum game. Greene isn't teaching empathy for the sake of mutual flourishing, collaboration, or community building. He is teaching you to think inside other people, specifically to prevent them from retarding your intellectual progress. You are observing them to neutralize them.
But let's ground this in a modern example. Let's say I am a junior analyst at a cutthroat investment bank. People are envious. Groups do enforce conformism.
Oh, absolutely they do.
My peers might actually want to see me fail, so they get the promotion. Greene is giving me armor. Acknowledging that people operate out of self-interest isn't inherently malicious. It's just pragmatic realism. If I don't emotionally detach, I'll get eaten alive.
Armor is heavy, and if you never take it off, you forget what your own skin feels like. Yes, the investment bank is toxic, but the tactics Greene promotes encourage that junior analyst to view peers and mentors strictly as instrumental tools to extract knowledge from.
Or as obstacles, I suppose.
Or as obstacles to be neutralized for personal leverage. This hyper-individualistic approach physically rewires your threat perception. It breeds dark triad behaviors, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. When you constantly treat human beings as variables in a strategic equation, or put on theatrical masks to disguise your true self, you destroy the authentic psychological trust required for healthy leadership.
Well, Greene might argue that this detachment is temporary. It's a way to survive the apprenticeship phase without being crushed by the office politics you just acknowledged exist.
But the psychological cost isn't temporary. It's permanent. It completely isolates the practitioner. Let's look at the mechanism of trust. Trust requires vulnerability.
Right.
If your entire operational model is based on hiding your intentions and reading other people's weaknesses, you are living in a paranoid, deeply cynical state. When you frame success as a zero-sum game where you must elevate yourself above the herd, you foster chronic stress.
So you're saying the loneliness is the real danger?
Exactly. When a practitioner of this philosophy inevitably encounters a severe setback, and everyone does, they have no genuine community to rely on. They only have a fragile network of transactional alliances they have coldly calculated. It promotes a psychopathology of isolation. You might end up technically skilled, a master of your specific domain, but completely alone and incapable of genuine connection.
We have covered tremendous ground today, pulling apart the seams of a highly influential text. To summarize our intellectual tug-of-war, I have maintained that Greene's historical deconstructions offer a profoundly inspiring and structured lens on human focus.
Which they do on the surface.
Right. The concepts of dedicating oneself to deep practice, navigating social realities pragmatically, and fusing intuitive and rational thought to achieve the dimensional mind do provide a powerful architectural blueprint for achievement. It gives individuals a sense of agency.
However, I will concede that we cannot ignore the blind spots you've illuminated.
I appreciate that.
The text undeniably operates with significant omissions regarding the biological realities of learning, the neurobiological impact of systemic trauma, and the psychological costs of instrumentalizing human relationships. We are refusing a neat resolution today because the tension between individual agency and systemic reality is inherently unresolved.
And that tension is exactly where the deepest learning happens. If there is a final observation to take away from this deconstruction, it is this. Robert Greene's mastery is ultimately a monument to the cognitive distortion of survivorship bias. By looking only at the 0.0001% of statistical outliers and working backward to create a neat linear narrative of causality, the framework dangerously masks extreme privilege and random mathematical chance as universal formulas. It tells us that success is purely a choice of focus, which inherently implies that failure is simply a lack of discipline. That is a mathematically invalid and psychologically damaging premise.
A stark reminder that even the most elegant frameworks require rigorous empirical scrutiny. We hope you use this debate not simply to dismiss the text, but to continuously build your own mental immunity. Take the concepts that serve your development, like the value of deep focus, but leave behind the biases and illusions of complete control that obscure reality. Remember to subscribe to Cognitive Dose for more intellectual investigations. We will see you next time.